Hi, it's Stu, and this is going to be in the middle of two different TBR challenge check-in and a bit of a book review. Although I don't, ever give a star rating to books. It's just for now. It's just not something I feel compelled to do. But I do like to talk about them a little bit. And I understand that there are formats, like people like to know synopses or not. I think that there are lots of ways to talk about books. And how I talk about books is just whatever comes to my mind as I'm holding the book and thinking, if I were going to give this book to someone, what would I share with them about this book? So my last TBR challenge was books about books, and I already did kind of an updated video on that, and I had a couple left. One on my Libby shelf, which I might not get to. I'm fine with that. And then The Black Book by Pamuk, yeah, and then The People of the Book by Geraldine Brooks, which actually fit very well into like the transition into the next TBR challenge, which is award winners. And I had kind of picked a book for each award. And so that kind of messed with that a little bit, like the transition over. But as the TBR challenge is just a suggestion, and as it's panning out now, they were just suggestions. So I'm just going to go in order of the books how I read these books, so that I can feel caught up and sort of neat and clean, and move these books into the, unhaul pile, not the remember to make a review video pile. So the first book that I listened to a little and then had to switch to listen to a lot, yeah, and then switch to reading was We Are Completely Besides Ourselves by Karen Joy Fowler. This was a really charming and incredibly intellectual book. It reminded me of The Secret Language of Animals, I believe, which I read earlier in some regards. And, partly because it was about academia and scientists, as this book is. This book drew through a lot of references. There's a lot of Kafka. Before in my life, I had some Kafka times, and then he's just a bit bleak, right? And so I have to be careful not to go in too deep. I was just like making sure that I wasn't conflating books because I am reading at a rapid pace. Yeah. So there's a lot of Kafka reference, but she also references Piaget. She references Noam Chomsky. And, what I find about literature, it reminds me of being in lit classes, right? That when they're dropping references and you don't know who they are, you might be missing some of the point. And where you do know who they are, as I did know the references that I just told you, you feel a little tingle in your head because you feel a kind of connection with the author. She also talks about books she's reading, and I really appreciated that. I love it when book authors mention books. And in fact, it kind of still fell into that books about books, because there's a lot of mentoring this sort of protagonist of books about books. I appreciated the way that the story unfolded, how you get to know the truth about the sister Fern. Fern is maybe named after Fern from Charlotte's Web. And I appreciated, I think that there are 6 parts, all with 7 stories, and kind of how the story unveils itself is really interesting. I really liked how Karen Joy Fowler wrote this book. It was hard to listen to, but I can say that about everything. I'm not a good listener, let's just be honest. I liked the exploration of family. I really did. I appreciated the introspection into animal cruelty, um, and animal rights. And I feel like this book is a bit of an awareness um, raiser on those issues. Um, and I appreciated the movement through the different settings. I mean, then we go from Illinois to California to South Dakota. So I would definitely, like, this was a great book. I would recommend this book to a lot of people, maybe people in academia, people who like books, people who are concerned with animal rights, and people who like a little bit of an intellectual read. This is a good recommendation. I've seen this book. I have this copy. I've seen this book in several little free libraries now, so it's out there. I still intend to put it back. I don't have anybody in my mind who I want to give this book to, although I do know several people who follow under those categories of who I would recommend to. I got this from a little free library in a neighboring town, and I think that I'm just going to intend to put it in a little free library in my neighborhood. Speaking of a little free library in my neighborhood, in my like local library box. The other night I was with a friend. I pulled this book out. I said, you know what? I shouldn't even take it. I'm not romance gal. And I'm not a hype gal, and this book is super hyped. It's an arc. So someone in my neighborhood, gets arcs. I see them in that local box. And I said to the person I was with, I can take this and read this in a matter of hours and just put it back into this box or redistribute it into another box, because this is a popular book and it's a good book to get into a little free library. So I did that, and I'm glad, because it was kind of palate cleansing. I'm inside of a lot of books all at once, and they're all very intellectual and emotionally and intellectually really like demanding. So this was none of that. This was all the things that people look for, I believe, in romance. And I would say this, Abby Jimenez, I think this is more than fine romance. I will problematize a couple of things. Maybe I'm just reading too much intellectual stuff. There were so many things and also I really want to say this too, sorry for the sidebar. There were a lot of things I really appreciated about this book. I will problematize the sort of demonization of the love interest, and I'm going to pronounce it Javier because I don't know. There wasn't, I believe, or if there was, I missed it. Notes, recommendations on how to pronounce his name. So I'm going to say Javier. And Javier's family, we don't get to know, just that it was a bad family. And in fact, I think that the looking into Samantha's family, the female love interest, and realizing that they are vulnerable in ways and they made mistakes in some ways, and humans are humans, and where, for instance, infidelity against your now very ill wife could really be demonized if you didn't look at all of the other aspects and factors, which we didn't get from the family of Javier. Just that he's estranged. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for setting boundaries and not being in strong communication with your family if they have toxic behaviors towards you. And I think that there was some of that in this book, but I also really didn't like that, for instance, Samantha's family cyberbullied and used sort of vigilante justice against Javier's father. I don't think anyone should be doing that. They don't have the whole story, and I think that was written in to be clever and cute, and I just really want to problematize that. Other than that, this was, this story did have depth, and I think that Abby Jimenez does sort of balance that, writing depth, writing real stories, giving depth of character, but also keeping it light, page flippy, and romantic. I really appreciated that where it did explore tropes, it used tropes. How else can romance exist? Again, this is me. This is the non-romance galley reader galley. Without, just oozing in some of those really stereotypical sexist tropes that exist in romance. I believe that people feel jealous, and I problematize if it's romanticized rather than just some sort of like real stream of consciousness. How do I get in touch? How do I process my jealous feelings? Not that they're romantic in any way. And this might have done that a little. So I don't know. I'm not hating on this book. Like, I'm glad I read this book. It was a fun, decent read, and a look into a family who is trying to stay together as a family, living across the country, and dealing with a member of the family who has dementia. And I thought it did a decent job of that. The next book that I finished was Punching in the Air. This one I just recently hauled as well. It was from a neighboring town's Goodwill. It was totally just I have a book hauling problem haul, and I got it because it's poetry, or it's written in verse. And April is Poetry Month, and also I have a very endeared colleague of mine who writes and publishes poetry, and she would just really love this book. So I thought, you know what, let me just kind of dabble in it a little, and then just unhaul it to her, which is what I said in the haul video. And then I started it, and I was so captivated. This book blew my mind. I read in the haul video, or in the TBR video, what Ibram X. Kendi said about this book, and I couldn't agree more. I really find it utterly indispensable. And the way in which, as X. Kendi said, these authors use creativity to combat the creativity of racism is fantastic. I have recommended this book to anyone who will listen to me, anyone who reads, anyone who wants to explore both the creativity of racism and the creativity of combating it, as X. Kendi said. And I wish that I had 10 copies of this book so I could give them to people who said, wow, say less about all of the great things that you're saying, and let me get in there and find out for myself. So this book has a home, and it has a destination. It's going to go there tomorrow. And it's part of the reason that I'm making this review video today, because I wanted to be able, I'm going to see the person who I'm going to give this book tomorrow, and I want to be able to do that and not have it stuck on a shelf waiting to give to the person, as some of my books are. The next book, and the last book that I'm really going to review fully in this, is Orhan Pamuk's The Black Book. As I said at the beginning of the video, this book kind of crosses that line between a book about a book and a prize winner. In the year of publication of this book, Pamuk also won the Nobel Prize. And so I think I'm not mistaken to say Nobel Prizes for a body of work, but often there's a masterpiece in there. Wow. Like, I had to do this video partly because, you can't just read this book and then, read a whole bunch of other books at the same time and also after, and then try to talk about this book. In fact, because this is classic litfic, in all of the ways of which you take a college course and you learn all of the things about how to really appreciate a book such as this, it's a little hard to make, a sort of nonchalant, just someone around here talking about books kind of video about this. I'm extremely grateful that I had read Pamuk's memoir, which was hard for me to get into, but it really set a strong foundation for me to be able to digest a lot of parts of this book. This book is not easy to digest. This book reminds me of swimming in the deep sea. The water is so deep. There is so much depth. The waves can reach terrorizing heights, or you can just have a moment of calm and be really part of the scenery. That's how reading this book felt to me, reminding me of Melville, the amount of references that are dropped. is incredibly daunting. It's daunting. That being said, the homage to Rumi, loved it. Now, this foray into Faust, I really understand because of Pamuk's memoir that he is an extremely well-read person, of course, but also the influence of French literature and literary critics into Turkish and Ottoman literature and the understanding therein. He goes into that in his memoir. So that's all. I mean, that's as far as I could get. I'm sorry I didn't, like, you're on the surface of the water, it's down there. I know very little about a turn of the century French literary critic and author named Faust. So I couldn't really get what was intended to be gotten from that. And also, I'm okay. I'm ready to let that go. I really appreciated the little historical fiction bit about the mannequins. I found that curious and interesting, and I like how Pamuk is able to add curious and interesting historical facts into really, really deep, also like probably this, again, I'm going to call it foray. Istanbul is his setting, and Istanbul twists and turns and is a city built on a city through empires, and he very much works it as a setting, and that's like exploring Istanbul also is another analogy, of course, that I would use, as I have been there, is kind of like exploring the different alleys and passageways that this book took me down. So the one there's a chapter on an executioner, and it drew me in. Like, I sometimes found it very hard to stay in this book. Like, I was just like, okay, so much history that I'm not familiar with, references that I kind of get, but it's been a minute. It feels like I could reach out and almost grab it, but not quite there. And then came this, like, there was a reference to Edgar Allan Poe in a column, and then came this chapter about this executioner, and it read to me a little bit like The Telltale Heart, and I was like almost a short story for me that kept me really gripped. And then it was a reference to what I believe to be a real rebellion by a Pasha rebellion. So this book also, like, it's really, for me, I experienced it as very genre bending at some points. I thought it was very much historical fiction. Otherwise, other times I was like, I'm just full into philosophy. I'm into polemics and philosophy right now. That's what this book is. And then, you kind of pull out, and it's magic realism or mysticism. And I think that there's references in here that would be notable the same way if you read, again, I'm going to go back to Melville and all of the references to Greek mythology that are kind of like trickled in. And this is more, Sufi, Persian, mysticism that I have a background in. So they're like wet. The appetite perked up the curiosity, but I'll be honest, especially at the pace that I'm reading, I couldn't really delve into, those depths that I had mentioned when I first started talking about this book. If you read, what's this book about? It's about a guy named Galip whose wife goes missing, and then a relative, which is like a half brother of hers, who's a journalist, a newspaper article writer in the time when that was a really important way to tell stories, that was also kind of being moved, like movies and cinema are kind of coming in to be the new way to tell stories. Anyway, his name is Jalal. Which, it's funny, in the translation it's spelled with a J, but in the Turkish language, this letter that we call a C is pronounced like a J. So anyway, yeah. So the back refers to him in one way, and then inside of the book he refers another, and that kind of threw me off until I remembered. I took a summer of Turkish lessons. Anyway, so Jalal's missing too, and then Gelip is like chilling out in his apartment, answering the phone and pretending to be him. And there's some interesting phone conversations that go on that, of course, have greater meanings of who's forming identity, what it means to have an identity. There's so much like work in this book about identity and in very, very philosophical ways. And yeah, so I'm going back to the premise because I got sidetracked. Because how could you because even though that's what this book is about, that's how it is. Like, if you were to carry that plot line, and you can through, you still have to swim through some really deep waters to stay on that plot line, because there's just a lot of alleyways that are gone down in this book. Excellent book. I'm putting this back into a Little Free Library. Actually, I got this from a Friends of the Library, but I'm putting it into a Little Free Library, trusting that someone out there also really just wants a good go at a classic. Another day in my life, I'll own this book, or I'll get this book again, because this is the kind of book you reread multiple times, and each and every time you probably only get part of the genius that Pamuk is and has created in this book. The last thoughts about this book. It came with an airline ticket stub. I love finding things like this. And it was really exciting. I told my child, look, there's a stub. And my child was like, well, it must be from way back in the day, because who does that anymore? Everybody has digital tickets. And I'm like, some people still do. Anyway, this ticket was from Cancun to Atlanta. And this book was hauled on the other side of the country. So, a fun fact of the story of that book. Nobel Prize winning lit-fic classic author. Before I leave this now long video, exactly why I had to make it, I have been listening to A Visit from the Goon Squad, which was my National Book Critic Award winner by Jennifer Egan. One can't listen to this book very well if one is me. There's a part where he goes into sort of like a Salinger, Catcher in the Rye-esque stream of consciousness, the main character. And so there's just lots of stream of consciousness going on with footnote upon footnote. He's having a conversation with someone at a cafe. And he's doing an interview actually. But this much of the script is the interview. And then the rest is footnote, subscript, footnote. And it just I don't know. I was like, what am I listening to? I can't listen to this. I'm going to have to just read it. I'm having great fun with this book. This is an incredibly fun book. I had to just let it go. I could not read it as well as The Black Book by Pamuk. I just really needed to be there was too much depth, and I had to have some clarity of mind. So I gave up listening to this book somewhere almost near the middle. And I also, in skimming through it, I realized there's these graphic organizers that are going to happen in this book, which I don't know how to listen to. So I'm going to be really glad to not listen to them, or maybe listen to them while looking at them, just to see what it's like to listen to a graphic organizer, as someone who has no training in doing that, while looking at it. And it's a lot of it's a lot of this book that is told through graphic organizers. Love that stylistically. But again, I had to kind of make a decision. So now that I'm done with The Black Book, this will be read. Probably I have the digital and the audio copy. So it'll probably be read that way. And this will be maybe my next book to finish, about halfway done. I might have to go back and reread some more, that just to get some context. There's a lot of characters in this book, a lot of characters, and their lives are kind of intersecting in really some of them obvious, some of them less obvious ways. And I think that connectivity is part of this book. And so in order to not miss that, I might have to go back and reread. The other book that I'm listening to is that book of short stories. And I listened to this on the commute to the neighboring town where I got the giant tote, 10 books for $5, etc., and back. And then a little bit since. It's a great listen. I'm going to listen to it on my evening walk this evening. These are short stories. Setting is Canada, about really about a lot about women, but it's about small towns, right? And the connections, both deep and superficial, that are made across lifetimes. And I'm really appreciating this book. It's such a different book than everything else that I have going on or here. And so I'm going to continue to listen to it on walks, short stories. I don't quite get a whole short story in a walk, but I can get really into it, and then to a place where I kind of understand what's going on and know that when I pick it up next, to continue listening, that will work out, rather than sort of coming out of a story at a weird time. So, yeah, Alice Munro's Dear Life. Yeah, great book. And obviously, this person was also the winner of a Nobel Prize. But this particular book, I think itself, won the Booker International. So that's where I'm at. I will do another sort of checking in on my TBR ensuing video soon, because it's hectic, and in some ways that's fun. It's spring. Like, there's pollen, there's sunshine, there's rain, there's very busy schedules, and then all of a sudden, like, way, I'm not busy, what's happening? So I feel a little bit of closure talking about those 4 books that I've finished, and just a little bit about the 2 that I'm mostly in. So until the next video, yay.